Hello everyone, welcome back to the SCS Insane series. I'm Zerania, and today I'll be showing how we're hunting down some mages. To do this, first we went to the Ice Island, and I was a little bit stubborn on my evil playthrough. Here you can see I have my typical skeletons out, buffed with strength of 1, and Monty goes up for a backstab. Importantly, I haven't actually learned spell thrust on the evil party at this point. I wanted to hold on to that to get the stone skin scroll here so that I could learn a bunch of scrolls at one time, but I probably should have just gone ahead and learned spell thrust, and then after that learned the stone skin after Baldur's Gate, since I won't be using it anyway. But as you can see here, I sent Monty in with the skeletons. The skeletons are pretty good at actually soaking up spells. And along with Monty's backstab, we took out the first two mages pretty quickly. You'll also see that Andrus uses a contingency to Dimension Door away. He will be returning shortly, giving us time to loot and prepare. When you see the buffs return in chat, that means that Andrus is about to come back, and he likes to open up with a Sunfire, and that Sunfire does a ton of damage. So I take all my squishies, have them run out around the corner so that the thing doesn't just one-shot them, and then the people who do get hit pop health potions. You'll see that Dorn is using fire arrows. Those actually aren't +1 in this version, so that's a mistake. He should have just been using his sword here after the Sunfire goes off, which I realize and do a little bit after this. You'll also see that Edwin's standing around the corner. That way Andrus can't just drop a summon monster on him and have all those guys hit him and kill him. So just keep your squishy safe, keep on beating on him, work through his contingency of mirror image and invisibility, and he will drop pretty quickly. Do note that the area I sent Dorn up to has a trap there. I disarmed that in between the two clips. Since this is a Tales of the Sword coast area, it's probably a little bit better to keep this till later on. I just wanted to come in and get the stone skin scroll just to have that available, but you probably should just do this later. It looks like I lost the clip for my next mage, but he wasn't too hard. He doesn't have a minor globe of invulnerability, so he's fully vulnerable to CC. The third mage is surrounded by a bunch of Ankh. Monty goes in for a big backstab, but he then fires off a contingency that has stone skin and mirror image, so we have to work through some defenses. However, with sleep working on Ankh, they are quickly ignored, which is nice. This time the sleep just took out all of them, so from there I can just focus on, or almost all of the Ankh, so I can focus right on the mage. And without having the extra damage coming from the Ankh, I can then just turn and burn the mage whenever he reappears, and he drops pretty quickly. It would be nice if I had the ability to remove these spell protections, but a single mage who's not really casting anything and doesn't re-up his spell protections dies super quickly. The next mage is a level 13 Necromancer, which means that the spell magic isn't very effective against him because it's based off your level. And he happens to cast protection from magic on himself. He also casts death spell, so if you send in your summons, he will kill them all off, and if you're too close, then you will also be included in that. This gives a couple different strategies. Since he doesn't cast protection from normal missiles, you could just keep on pelting him with your ranged attacks, and then if you have them, normal melee weapons against him. Instead, I just run off and let the protection from magical weapons run out, and then just start beating on him and he quickly dies. I then take the Winter Wolves out from around the corner by sneaking over. They are easily dispatched if you use the Belt of the Antipode. Then Monty sneaks up, gets a big backstab, and we quickly just start zerging this guy down. He does get a stone skin off, but he doesn't mirror image, which means that his effective HP is pretty low, and with everybody hasted up and beating on him, he quickly falls. So now that we've acquired the Stone Skin Scroll, it's time to learn that and Spell Thrust, and I did this for the good party before going into the Ice Island. But as you can see, the chance to learn spells with 19 int is 95. That's a little bit of a misnomer because as an illusionist, you get a 15% better chance to learn scrolls of the same type, so illusion spells, and a 15% worse chance to learn scrolls of any other type. So I went to the temple at the Friendly Arm Inn, bought some potions of genius, and as you can see, popping 1 gets me to a 98% chance to learn spells, which isn't quite good enough. And again, that's a little bit of a misnomer because that 99 for 23 int is again 15% worse for non-illusion spells. But by popping a second one, that gets me to 25 int on my 2 mages. You only need 24, but 25 is what it ends up with these 2 potions. And that gets you to 150%, which means that even with that 15% penalty for non-illusion spells, you have a 100% chance to learn your spells. So I then popped a bunch of scrolls and was good to go. For the good side, I didn't want to use haste here, but I did want to use spell thrust, just to give a little bit of a different perspective. Also, for this one, I used a little bit different of a strategy. Instead of attacking the guy on the right, instead I started attacking Andrus with a big backstab that makes his contingency immediately fire. That way, instead of being 3 mages you have to deal with at a time, you only have to deal with 2. You'll see that my other mages and the rest of the party then approach. Zan tosses a spell thrust at the guy with the minor globe. That makes it so that he is actually vulnerable to getting spells cast at him. While that's happening, everybody else just starts attacking. As soon as the spell thrust lands, I then start tossing CCs at the mages. You'll see a horror go out, a silence go out. The idea being that since the minor globe is gone, we just want to make it so that these guys are as vulnerable as possible to getting hit without them casting their nasty spells at us. Luckily, the horror hits one, the silence works on the other, and 2 mages who can't actually do anything quickly fall. Corin then disarms a couple traps because Andrus is about to contingency back in, and he's going to be angry. I then use the same thing of having everybody spread away and run out so that the Sunfire doesn't murder them. This time, though, we have Zan with Spell Thrust, so he can toss a way to remove the level 1 protections, but we don't have a good way to remove the invisibility that he has. I try a Glitter Dust, but that doesn't work because he saves against the spell, so we just have to beat him down normally. This is probably the hardest of the fights in this area. The last boss only tosses up Stone Skin, which means that without having spell protections, he's vulnerable to CC, and since he doesn't mirror image as well as Stone Skin, his physical damage resistance isn't that bad. So if you can get past this first fight, the rest of the fights should be able to be taken out without too much of a problem. This really is your first intro to the, quote, mage chest that some people talk about with SCS. At this point, we don't have all of the tools we need, but that will get fixed a little bit later on, which will make this kind of thing a lot easier. You can see that the monster summon comes out, but a quick sleep takes care of that. The next mage, I didn't have Corin go up and backstab like I should have, but this one really shows you the way that you can take a look at the contingencies to see what all you have to deal with. Here you can see that there is a double horror going out. That means that everyone's going to have to save first spell twice. So I toss out a remove fear. He also has a shield on, so tossing magic missiles a really bad idea. He does have a minor spell deflection, so I just am tossing out as many spells as I can to burn through that. But that doesn't end up mattering. He dies before the spells go through. You'll note that I switch over Varsicona to Corin to get bigger backstabs. It almost kills this guy, but doesn't quite. So Corin runs off, switches over to his bow, which he's the Thaco Lord of, pops a health potion because he got hit by a bunch of Onkegs, swap the weapon back. This time, though, I have Spell Thrust, which Spell Thrust removes the guy's spell protection, even though he goes invisible. Spell Thrust, if you start casting it, still will go through on invisible targets. So this time, as he comes out, he is able to be hit by a command. The command drops him on the ground, and he dies. The horror feared the Onkegs, and this is the, quote, bad part about invisible, or enemies that go untargetable, is you gotta sometimes sit and wait out the CCs, but it's a small trade-off to not have to deal with them during the fight. For the next page, Corrin tries to backstab, but actually misses, which is quite unfortunate. This time, I do have a spell thrust ready to take down his spell defenses so that we can get fighting on him. However, he has a contingency for another minor globe, which means that that plan doesn't actually end up working because I only had one spell thrust prepared. This is where a sorcerer who could, spell thrust as many times as you had spell slots without having to plan it out is a little bit nicer, but you go with what you have. The only sorcerer NPC companion is Baloth, and we aren't using him in this run for the reasons talked about in the introduction. However, this guy, beyond doing a dire charm, which doesn't end up actually doing much to me, he just quickly goes down. I do have to keep Corrin safe. I toss on the belt of the antipode so that if he does get hit by the frost breath, then that would actually prevent the damage. And then once he's safe, I toss it over to the next closest member, which is Ajantis, and the mage goes down. We then use the same plan of going over to the cleared out Winterwolf area where we carefully cleared it without pulling this guy. Corrin goes in for a big backstab. This time, to remove the minor spell deflection, Zan has spell thrust, which means that with his spell defenses cleared out, Nira is able to toss a flame arrow and finish this guy off before his stone skins wear off. Next up is going to Cloakwood, and in Cloakwood you have Aldeth and the Druid. If you don't have Jaheira in the party, you are forced to fight, but because my evil party has Jaheira, I wanted to go ahead and show off the little piece that they added in EE, which is where Jaheira can actually talk them down. I only went with this because in this party I have Jaheira, myself, and Dorn as good melee fighters, and I'll have myself using a silver longsword, Jaheira using the silver dagger, and Dorn can use the sword of Baldur, which means that I have enough of these silver weapons when we get to the Werewolf Island. Otherwise, if you kill off Aldeth, you can get an extra silver weapon. On the good side, I again attempt to talk down Aldeth because that's what a good character would do. However, the druids don't want to actually stand down here. And you would think that silence would be the thing to use here, but it has too long of a cast time because Cinead will try and do an insect plague, and if that insect plague goes off, you are done for. So I have all my people send out their CCs and beat down Cinead so he can't do his insect plague, and it worked out no problem. From there, it's just clean up the druids. Most of them got feared, and then we were good to go. Next up, in Cloakwood 2, there's a spider who has a very useful sword. That sword gives free action, which we will be using shortly. The big thing here is the spiders. There's a sword spider, and the sword spider can do a lot of damage. They also shoot out webs, so if you have a free action ring, it's nice to toss out. I probably should switch it over to Ajantis here, just because you can see he got targeted. But as long as you focus down that sword spider, and then toss out some CCs if you have them available, this isn't too bad of a fight. The big part is that sword spider, if it is attacking somebody who's webbed, they will get killed off pretty quickly. So avoiding that by focusing down that sword spider and tossing out some AoEs to weaken them off makes it go pretty smooth. In Cloakwood 3, there's a lot of druids. They don't really drop anything too useful, but you can kill them for fun. Since they're druids and they don't have vocalize or any kind of spell protections, you can pretty easily just toss out a bunch of AoEs and silences, and they drop without a big problem for the ones outside of the treehouse. However, inside the treehouse is an Archdruid, and in SCS, he has 2 extra buddies added with him. Very important is he knows Remove Fear, which means that we need to make sure that the main Archdruid gets hit by CC. So I cast a Spook and a Horror. The first Spook does not go through on the main guy, so we try again. Because the first Spook doesn't go through, his spell goes off. It's just summoning a Direwolf, which isn't a big problem. If he gets his Remove Fear off, though, that makes it so that the rest of the guys are going to get unCC'd as well as himself, and he turns into a Fire Salamander and just causes all kinds of problems. The other thing is he has Physical Mirror, so I make sure that my people normally using bows switch over to their melee weapons so that they don't accidentally kill themselves. As you can see, he finished off his Spook, turns into a Spider, but at this point, he is easily killed. On the good side, unfortunately, things didn't go quite as smoothly. My initial horror didn't go off, and the second horrors were mitigated by his Remove Fear. Luckily, Bramwin's Hold Person actually tagged the 2 secondary druids, which means that at least I was still on a 6v1. But the main druid was able to start trying to do things. He turned into a spider. He gets a poison off on Corrin. And on SCS, because the double damage is here, poisons do a ton of damage. So anytime you see a poison, you want to have somebody use a slow poison. That's one reason why I tend to keep my main character above the required 10 rep for the Dream Ball Spawn powers, because slow poison is just very handy to have. But with it being a 6v1, the guys drop pretty quick. For the good party, I went off and did a Doi as well. For some reason on SCS, despite this fight having several mages, it actually seems to be pretty easy. Maybe they didn't tweak it. But your typical strategy of mages without spell protections just get hit by CCs and die. That works no problems here. While this fight's rolling, I'll go ahead and start talking about the next major fight, which is the guys right outside the Cloakwood Mine. That tended for me to be one of the harder fights in this game before I really got used to it. And part of that is there's only one scroll of Spell Thrust, which means that if you don't take Baloth, you only have one person who can actually remove the Minor Globes of Invulnerability, and the fighter can pop a Potion of Magic Blocking, and then with his Boots of the Cheetah, he just runs at your guys and you have some big problems. If you do take Baloth, you can have a third caster, such as on a Blade, which I did recently. I had the Mage cast Spell Thrust, I had Baloth cast Spell Thrust, and then I had my Blade toss out a Skull Trap, and that just interrupts all the casters, and you're in a pretty good spot. However, since they cast a Minor Globe, if you only have the one non-Baloth caster, so you only have the one Spell Thrust, that leads to a lot more complications. So on the evil party, I did my typical summon skeletons, use Strength of 1, and go ahead and buff up. Monty went into stealth for a backstab, and as you can see, Dorn is standing off to the side so that Jaheira buff misses him so that he has his full strength. After that, we have Monty go in for a backstab, which he unfortunately misses. And then this is where the fun begins. So the general plan is to have my main character Spell Thrust on the mages so that they can actually be hit by CC. Because Spell Thrust has a cast time of 3, Call Lightning can go off and target that same mage and get some damage going there without having to deal with Stone Skin and Mirror Images. Vicky is going to cast a Hold Person to try and immobilize the cleric, and Monty is going to be targeted by the fighter, and that fighter is going to get kited and then run into the skeletons, so that the skeletons are going to tank him. From this point, you can see that the fighter quaffs a Potion of Magic Shielding. He can either do that or do a Potion of Freedom, and the Potion of Freedom actually makes things easier because a Potion of Freedom prevents him from having the hasted up Boots of the Cheetah. But no such luck this time. So Monty's going to run around, and unfortunately the cleric saves against his spells. But Edwin's going to toss out a horror and get the mage feared. And that means that now instead of it being 4 people we're dealing with, it's only dealing with 3. And Monty is going to kite into the skeletons because these skeletons are idiots. They're attacking the mage. I then send them back to the fighter. Because the enemy mage appeared, we can now spell thrust him. And at this point, it's now just dealing with the cluster. But we're starting to get it under control because now we're down to 3 people. So Jaheira is going to Alicorn Lance the mage because spell thrust will go off first. And the reason we're doing that and not to the half-dead mage is that mage is feared. And we can take care of him whenever. So we're just trying to get it so that the people who are alive are the ones that we are going to kill off, because a CC'd person is effectively a dead person just in a little bit of time. And horror lasts for 1 turn if it's not the ball spawn power, which is 60 seconds, and that's more than enough time for us to be able to clean up as we go. Our second hold person unfortunately fails, but we have that wand of paralyzation that we picked up from doing the ice island and wands of fear. So now we're just going to keep on spamming as much CCs as we can so that we can hopefully take care of these people. Dorn swaps over to his sword to just try and do some cleanup. But it probably would have been better for him to be going for the active people rather than the CC'd ones. Because that cleric can hit pretty hard though. We're just going to go ahead and try and get some more CC out before sending them in so we don't randomly get people one shot. It looks like our wand of paralyzation actually worked. Nope, it didn't. Never mind. But the idea is just as soon as we get everybody CC'd, the fight's done. So we have our people tanking and just spamming CC ones, spamming blind, basically just trying to get these guys under control so that we can finish them off. And the reason why we're CCing so much is, as you can see by Monty taking a giant hit there on Insane with double damage on, you get hit really hard sometimes. So it's better just to get people CC'd instead of trying to tank them, and that makes life a lot safer. The fighter is going to run in a second because he finished off the skeletons, but he's low enough health and doesn't have any kind of support, so the archers can just finish him off without it being a big problem. And from that point, everybody else is CC'd, so the fight ends pretty easily. The other big reason why you want to make sure that you're focusing down the mages and kind of ignoring the other 2 members is they have the spell Chaos, and Chaos can quickly make things get out of hand, because at this point you don't have chaotic commands or anything like that. You can have, your greenstone amulet, and that helps, but that's the only way to really counter it outside of being a berserker, which I get to feature here. Also, in this case, luck was a lady for Corin, and he got a massive backstab off and actually took out one of the mages immediately, and that just made things so nice in comparison. Obviously, the mage cast a summon monster, but the other nice thing is the fighter here popped a potion of freedom, like I mentioned they can do, instead of the potion of magic blocking. So he's able to be CC'd rather than making it so that he can't be affected by spells at all. So with down 1 mage and having the potion of freedom rather than the potion of magic blocking, now it just starts spamming out your wands of CC, have your horrors go out. We have our people, our skeletons tanking, though they're not buffed up with strength of 1 on this one, and there's only 2 of them. But combine all of that, and this just went as smoothly as you can. The cleric got crowd controlled, one of the mages got killed off, the other mage, the spell thrust into horror combo, got him CC'd, and all the summons got crowd controlled with horror as well. So this went about as smoothly as it can, And sometimes you just get lucky, like Corin says. On level 2 of the Cloakwood Mines, this fight inside this room with the mage can be pretty difficult because there's a lot of random guys here. So, of course, I've come up with a strategy that uses web to make things a lot easier. So I toss out my 2 webs, and then we have a mage who has a minor globe up. As you'll know, that's pretty much the most common spell protection here. However, if you toss a spell thrust on her when she's standing in the webs, sometimes like that, she just gets held, and now you can just start spamming your wand of fireball, and all the people inside who are webbed, they don't have much of a chance. I try and walk Edwin over to use some skull traps to help make this go a little bit quicker, but web is kind of a double-edged sword, and in this case he just gets webbed, but it doesn't really matter because the guys inside the room are unable to fight back, and it just ends up being some cleanup. For the good party, I use a very similar strategy. However, because Zan is the person who has spell thrust and he is unable to learn evocation spells, he can't learn web, which that makes this a little bit more of a challenge, partially because Nira, being a wild mage, it's harder to plan out an exact strategy whenever you can shoot out a silence instead of a web. And then whenever our mage shows up, I switch over my freedom ring, have Zan walk over, and use that to toss out a spell thrust so that she gets hopefully webbed. Then he switches over to doing skull traps, and the same thing happens. So overall, it still works out just fine, just a little more difficult because you have to manage swapping the ring around, having one person use spell thrust, having the other use web. But in the end, it works out just fine. For Deveorn, on the evil party, it ended up being pretty easy because as a shorty, my gnome fighter illusionist has extremely good spells for save. I believe it was at 3 for this, and also has the spell thrust needed. And I'm also using haste on this for this party. So what I did was I had a spell thrust go on Deveorn. The contingency of Stinking Cloud and Web came out. I tossed on the Ring of Free Action so that I could run through without having the web trap me, and then kited the Battle Horrors back. This let me focus one of them down while Deveorn was off doing whatever. He tends to dimension door around, and that let me kill off a Battle Horror and then web off the bandits or the guards as they came in. And then Deveorn himself shows up, and at that point, it's focus him down. As you can see here, I double check the spell protections that Deveorn has to see if he has a shield or not, but decide that Magic Missile isn't a good choice anyway, so I try and toss out a Horror, but I'm on the spell 6-second round timer, so his Horror doesn't actually go off. And this Battle Horror really wants to fight Edwin, so I just have Edwin run away a bunch and then try and do a Horror again. And at this point, with Deveorn having my entire party sitting and beating on him without his spell protections, and I'm sending off CCs at him, eventually something goes through and he dies. Now, that may have looked easy, but that was about the best case scenario for what could have happened. Here, I'm using the Spiderbane sword and a slightly different strategy to showcase it, partially because Zan is the person who needs to get the spell thrust off, so I can't just immediately toss that out. So what I did was I tossed a web into the main room and have everybody off to the side room. Here I can now focus down the Battle Horrors, and you'll notice that Zan isn't actually casting anything. I am just immediately waiting for Deveorn to actually show up. And I'm just tossing out buffs and killing these Battle Horrors while I wait. You can see in the chat log that guards are showing up, so I started tossing some fireballs. I have Ajantis double check to see if I can get Deveorn to actually come into this room, but he is not wanting to go. So I have Zan toss on the Ring of Free Action, have him toss a Spell Thrust out. He gets hit by a Melfs, and that's why I didn't want to have him go out in the first place. Now Deveorn finally teleports in, But at this point, my web has run out, and that means that I have to deal with all these guards as well, which that makes things a lot more challenging. So Koran tosses on some +1 arrows so that he can actually get an attack off, but then Deveorn immediately does what he does and Dimension Doors away. So I send off my main PC, who is able to run down and find Deveorn while everyone else is just attacking the guards. This is both good and bad because Deveorn against a fighter isn't exactly at his best. However, he still does a ton of damage with things like Cone of Cold, and I almost immediately take a huge chunk of damage. So then he Dimension Doors back, and now my party can fully hit him again. So I again toss out fireballs and, all the different spells that I can, and Zan dies because he is a mage and there's a bunch of archers. So despite having decent AC, sometimes they go through and he doesn't have much health. So I go back to beating on Deveorn with all my characters. Again, almost die, pop a health potion, almost die, and then kill Deveorn at the last second before the guards actually take me out. And then once the guards are down, or the boss is down, the guards all run away. So it ends up being okay. And then after that, I did end up going to pick up the belt from the people at the garden where the basilisks are. But at this point, when you can just toss out a bunch of spells and AoEs, they tend to be less of a problem. Though it does lead to funny things on big open maps with horror sometimes. So you'll get to see the whole Benny Hill chase down occur here. But I think that's it for this one, guys. You all have a good one, and I'll see you next time for shenanigans in Baldur's Gate itself into the Iron Throne.